A covered face makes honest men nervous, someone said, and by noon, every man in Red Hollow had proven it. The market baked beneath a white Arizona sun. Dust clung to boots. Horse sweat darkened saddle leather. Somewhere beneath the wooden awnings, onions fried in old grease while cattle bawled behind rough pine fencing. At the far end of the hiring platform stood a woman no one would touch. She was Apache. That alone had already narrowed her chances. The black veil covering everything below her eyes finished the job. One rancher hired a drunk with shaking hands. Another chose a boy whose boots were held together with twine. A freight master looked straight at the veiled woman, hesitated, then offered $2 extra for an old man standing beside her. Anything, it seemed, was preferable. She said nothing. Her name was Nayeli, but nobody in Red Hollow had asked. Silas Mercer stood near the platform in a cream-colored vest that had never known honest dirt. He owned the hiring stalls, half the storage sheds, and enough mortgages to make respectable men lower their voices when he walked past. He studied her with a strange tightness around his mouth. "Market closes at sundown," he said. Nayeli did not move. Mercer stepped closer. "You hear me?" Her dark eyes lifted. That was all. Something about those eyes changed his face for half a second. Not anger. Recognition. Then it was gone. "Apache camps east," he said loudly. "You'd be better off there." A few men laughed. Nayeli lowered her gaze again. She had been standing since morning with a small canvas bundle at her feet. No horse. No family. No weapon anyone could see. Only that veil. Black cloth, sun faded at the edges, moving softly each time the desert wind passed through the market. By 3 o'clock, everyone else had been chosen. Everyone but her. That was when Ethan Cole rode in. He came for salt, lamp oil, and 2 sacks of coffee. Nothing more. 34 years had taught Ethan that trouble usually announced itself before a man was foolish enough to invite it home. The silent Apache woman on the empty platform looked exactly like trouble. He almost kept walking. Then he noticed her hands. They were clenched beneath the edge of her shawl, fingers raw from cold nights despite the afternoon heat. One knuckle was split. Another carried dried blood. Not dangerous hands. Tired ones. Mercer saw Ethan looking. "Cole." Ethan stopped. "Don't." One word. Too quick. Ethan turned his head. Mercer smiled, but the smile had arrived late. "She's not your concern." Ethan looked back at Nayeli. For the first time, she looked directly at him. No pleading. No invitation. If anything, there was warning in her eyes. That interested him more than fear would have. "What's the rate?" Ethan asked. The market went quiet. Mercer's jaw hardened. "I said she isn't. I heard you." Ethan placed $3 silver on the table. Then he looked at Nayeli. "You need work." A long silence. She nodded once. Ethan picked up her canvas bundle before anyone could object. "She rides with me." Someone behind him muttered a curse. Another man laughed nervously. But Nayeli did something Ethan did not expect. She stepped backward. Her hand rose instinctively toward the veil. And for the first time that day, fear entered her eyes. Not fear of Mercer. Fear of Ethan. By sundown, he would begin to understand why. And when that veil finally fell, Red Hollow would remember the moment for the rest of its life. The strangest thing about Nayeli was not the veil. It was how carefully she noticed everything. Ethan discovered that before they had ridden 5 miles beyond Red Hollow, she sat beside him on the wagon bench without complaint, her canvas bundle tucked between her boots, black veil moving softly whenever the desert wind crossed the road. She did not ask where they were going. She did not ask how far. She watched. Fence lines, trail markers, passing riders. Every time another horse appeared on the horizon, her shoulders tightened. Ethan noticed. He said nothing. By sunset, the red cliffs west of town had swallowed most of the light. His ranch sat low in a shallow valley, little more than a weathered cabin, a barn, 2 corrals, and 40 acres of stubborn earth that had survived because Ethan was too stubborn to let it die. He climbed down. Water pumps behind the barn. Nayeli followed. Kitchens. Through there. She waited. Ethan pointed toward the smaller room beside the pantry. "You can sleep there." Still nothing. Then he added, "Door locks from the inside." Her eyes lifted sharply. For some reason, that simple sentence seemed to reach her deeper than anything else he had said. Ethan carried the supplies inside. When he returned, Nayeli was still standing by the porch. "You always this quiet?" he asked. Her answer came through the veil. Only when people are listening. Ethan looked toward the empty hills. No one was there. At least, no one he could see. Dinner was beans, cornbread, and the last strips of dried beef. Nayeli ate slowly. She kept the veil lowered, lifting the cloth only enough to bring food beneath it. Ethan pretended not to notice. Most men would have asked, "Who are you? Why were you alone? Why did Mercer want you gone?" Ethan asked none of them. That seemed to trouble her more. After the meal, he left a folded blanket beside her door. "No debt," he said. Nayeli stared at him. "For the food. No, the room. No, the work. That starts tomorrow." A pause. "What do you want?" Ethan leaned against the doorway. "Fence repaired." She almost smiled. Almost. Later that night, Ethan woke to the sound of floorboards. He reached for the revolver beside his bed, then stopped. Light leaked beneath the kitchen door. Through the narrow opening, he saw Nayeli standing at the table. His supply ledger lay open before her. She was reading it, not guessing at numbers. Reading. Her finger moved down columns of cattle sales, land taxes, and freight charges with practiced precision. Then she stopped. A seal had been stamped beside an old property entry. Red Hollow Land Office. Nayeli went completely still. Her hand moved to the turquoise pendant beneath her shawl. She opened it. Ethan caught only a glimpse of something pale inside. Paper. Tiny. Folded many times. Then a floorboard creaked beneath his weight. Nayeli spun around. The pendant disappeared into her fist. Neither spoke. Ethan slowly lowered his hand away from the revolver. "Coffee's better in the morning," he said. He turned back toward his room. Behind him, Nayeli whispered one name. "So." Softly, he nearly missed it. "Mercer." Ethan stopped. The silence changed. Because he had never told her Silas Mercer's full name. And 3 miles away, on the ridge above the ranch, a rider was already watching the cabin light burn. By sunrise, Ethan knew 2 things. Nayeli had lied about nothing, and she had told him almost nothing. The difference bothered him. Morning came cold and colorless over the ranch. The eastern sky washed pale behind the ridge. Horses shifted in the corral. Leather creaked. Somewhere beyond the barn, a meadowlark called once and went quiet. Nayeli was already working. She had tied back her sleeves and was repairing the north fence with the kind of patience that came from having done harder things before. The veil remained in place. Always the veil. Ethan carried coffee toward her. "You sleep?" "A little." "You read ledgers often?" Her hand stopped for half a heartbeat, then continued twisting wire. "Sometimes." That answer usually means yes. She looked at him. That question usually means you already know. Ethan handed her the coffee. No accusation. No demand. Just steam rising between them in the cold. Nayeli accepted it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then her eyes shifted past his shoulder. Toward the ridge. Ethan saw it too. One rider. Far enough away to pretend he was passing. Still enough to prove he was not. The man sat against the morning sky like a black nail hammered into the horizon. Ethan set his cup on the fence post. "Friend of yours?" No, the answer came too quickly. Ethan watched the rider. Then another shape appeared farther south. A second horse. By mid-morning, there were 3. None came closer. None waved. None left. They simply watched. Nayeli worked faster. That told Ethan more than words would have. At noon, he found her behind the barn filling a bucket. Mercer's men. She did not look up. "I don't know." "That's twice." "What?" "You've answered before I finished asking." She set the bucket down. The wind lifted one edge of the veil. Her hand caught it immediately. "You should send me away." Ethan studied her. "Why?" "Because they will come closer." "Who?" Silence. Ethan exhaled through his nose. There it was again. A wall made of quiet. Before he could speak, hoofbeats rolled across the dry ground. Slow. Deliberate. One rider descended from the ridge. He stopped outside the corral. Broad hat. Gray coat. Clean boots. Ethan recognized him. Caleb Dorsey. Worked collections for Mercer. The kind of man who never raised his voice because other men usually did what he wanted before he had to. Cole. Dorsey. Caleb's eyes moved past Ethan. Found Nayeli. Then changed. Not surprise. Confirmation. There she is. Nayeli went still. Ethan stepped between them. Caleb smiled. Silas figured you might be foolish enough. Enough for what? To mistake trouble for charity. Ethan's face hardened. Caleb leaned forward in the saddle. Send her back. No, the smile vanished. You don't know what she is. Nayeli's fingers closed around the pendant beneath her shawl. Ethan noticed. So did Caleb. And that was when Ethan understood something worse. They were not watching Nayeli because they feared what she might do. They were watching her because they feared what she carried. Caleb turned his horse. Before riding away, he looked back once. Tomorrow, Cole. Then he rode toward Red Hollow. On the ridge above him, 2 more riders appeared. Then a 4th. And Nayeli whispered through the veil, "They found me." By noon the next day, Red Hollow had already decided who Nayeli was. The truth had not been invited. Ethan rode into town with her beside him because staying hidden had become more dangerous than being seen. The market was louder than usual. Wagon wheels knocked over stone. Chickens scattered beneath boots. Heat shimmered above the roofs. But conversation died when people noticed the black veil. Then it started again in whispers. Apache, Mercer's woman, thief, murderer. Nayeli heard every word. She kept walking. Ethan stayed half a step beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Silas Mercer waited near the land office beneath a striped awning, one hand hooked casually into his vest. Caleb Dorsey stood nearby with 2 men Ethan did not know. Mercer smiled. There she is. Ethan stopped. You sent men to my ranch. I sent men to recover what doesn't belong to her. Nayeli's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. Ethan noticed. Mercer noticed more. Before either man spoke again, a merchant pushed through the gathering crowd. His name was Horace Pike, a narrow-faced trader who had spent 20 years selling flour, ammunition, blankets, and rumors with equal enthusiasm. He stared at Nayeli. Not at her clothes. Not at the veil. At the sound of her breathing. Say something, he whispered. Nayeli did not. Pike stepped closer. I know that voice. Ethan turned. You heard her speak? Years ago. Pike's face went pale beneath the dust. Then his fear became excitement. The kind men liked when they realized they could give a crowd something ugly. I knew her father. The market shifted. Mercer said nothing. That silence gave Pike courage. Apache raider named Chato Gray Wolf. Government had a bounty on him. A murmur rolled through the street. Someone spat into the dirt. Another man said, knew there was something wrong. Ethan looked at Nayeli. Her eyes remained steady. Is he telling the truth? She took a long breath. My father was called Chato. That was enough. The crowd erupted. Raider. Killer. Mercer was right. A woman pulled her child backward as though Nayeli carried disease. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had defended her without knowing her. Now doubt came easily. That frightened him more than anger. Nayeli looked directly at him. She saw it. The hesitation. Small, but real. My father had a name, she said. That doesn't answer what he did. No, her voice stayed quiet. It made the crowd lean closer. Pike pointed at her. His gang burned ranches north of the river. Men died. Nayeli turned toward him. And you saw my father do it. Pike hesitated. I heard enough. That was not my question. Silence. Mercer's jaw tightened. Nayeli looked around at the faces surrounding her. Then back at Ethan. If my father was guilty, she asked, does that make me guilty too? No one laughed now. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came. Because the answer should have been easy. But Red Hollow had spent years teaching men otherwise. A gust swept dust through the market. The veil lifted slightly. Just enough for Sheriff Amos Reed, standing near the courthouse steps, to glimpse the edge of a pale scar beneath it. His face changed. He dropped the papers in his hand. Nayeli, she froze. The sheriff stared at her as though a ghost had walked out of the desert. Then he whispered, you were supposed to be dead. For one long second, nobody in Red Hollow moved. Sheriff Amos Reed stood on the courthouse steps with his papers scattered around his boots. Nayeli stared at him. Ethan stared at both of them. Then Mercer laughed. Not loudly. That made it worse. Old men see ghosts everywhere, he said. Reed did not look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the edge of scar beneath Nayeli's veil. I remember that mark. The market went quiet again. Nayeli stepped back. Caleb Dorsey moved first. He crossed the dirt fast and reached for her arm. Ethan caught his wrist. Don't. Caleb smiled without humor. Move, Cole. No, men shifted around them. Hands drifted toward belts. A horse snorted somewhere behind the crowd. Nayeli's breathing changed beneath the veil. Mercer came down from the land office porch. This has gone far enough. He pointed at her. That woman is carrying stolen property. Nayeli's hand went to the turquoise pendant. Mercer saw it. So did Ethan. There. That was what they wanted. Caleb twisted free and lunged. Nayeli turned. His fingers missed the pendant. They caught the veil. The cloth tore with a dry sound. Small. Almost nothing. But the whole market heard it. The black veil slid from Nayeli's face and fell into the dust. No one spoke. Ethan forgot to breathe. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because the crowd had imagined something monstrous beneath the cloth and found only a woman. It was the scar. A thin white line crossed her left temple and disappeared into her hair. Ethan had seen that scar before. Not on her. In a photograph. An old tintype kept inside his father's cedar box. A little Apache girl wrapped in a wool blanket. Blood down one side of her face. Samuel Cole kneeling beside her. Ethan's stomach turned cold. He looked at Nayeli again. Older. Stronger. But the same eyes. The same scar. The same turquoise pendant around the child's neck. You, Ethan whispered. Nayeli's expression broke for the first time. Not fear. Grief. Sheriff Reed came down one step. My God. Mercer's face had lost all color. Ethan turned slowly toward him. That was when he understood. Mercer had never been afraid of an Apache woman in a veil. He had been afraid someone would recognize her. Ethan looked back at Nayeli. My father knew you. She held his gaze. Yes. The word barely crossed the space between them. Around them, Red Hollow had gone so still Ethan could hear the loose sign above the feed store tapping in the wind. He swallowed. What happened to you? Nayeli looked down at the veil lying in the dust. For years it had hidden her from men who remembered too much. Now there was nowhere left to hide. She lifted her eyes. Your father saved my life. Mercer took one step backward. Nayeli saw it. So did Ethan. Then she added, and he saw what Silas Mercer did that night. The market turned toward Mercer as one. He stopped moving. For the first time since Ethan had known him, Silas Mercer looked like a man who had nowhere to stand. Nayeli bent down. She picked up the torn veil. And beneath the silence of 100 watching faces, she said, My father was not the man Red Hollow remembers. Then she looked at Sheriff Reed. You know that too. The story Red Hollow remembered had been told by men who survived it. Nayeli's story came from the people they left behind. Sheriff Reed bent slowly and gathered the papers at his feet, but his hands trembled so badly that half of them slipped back into the dust. Mercer watched him. That frightened Ethan more than anything. Tell it, Nayeli said. Reed looked at her. I was a deputy then. His voice sounded older than his face. 20 years ago. The market remained silent. Even the horses seemed quieter. Reed swallowed. There was a settlement north of the river. Small place. Mostly families. Apache families camped nearby under a protection agreement. A man in the crowd muttered, Protection? Reed turned toward him. Yes. The single word shut him up. Nayeli stood without the veil now. The sun touched the scar at her temple. She did not cover it. Reed continued. Men wanted that land. Silver had been found in the hills. More than anyone admitted. Ethan glanced at Mercer. Mercer's expression had gone flat. Too flat. Who were the men? Ethan asked. Reed hesitated. Nayeli answered. Men who called themselves investors. Her eyes moved to Mercer. Men who hired others to do what respectable men did not want seen. A dry wind crossed the square. Dust pressed against boots. Reed closed his eyes. There was supposed to be a raid. Supposed to be? Ethan asked. A story, Nayeli said. They needed a story first. She looked toward Horace Pike. The story was that Apache raiders attacked settlers. Pike's face tightened. Nayeli went on. But the settlers had already been moved. That changed the air. Ethan felt it. Confusion first. Then something heavier. The men came at night, Nayeli said. They burned the camp. They killed anyone old enough to identify them. No tears. That made it harder to hear. My father fought back. Someone whispered, Chato. Nayeli nodded. That is why they called him a raider. Ethan looked at her scar. How old were you? 7. The answer struck him harder than he expected. She touched the white line at her temple. My mother covered my face with this veil while we ran. She held the torn black cloth in one hand. It was not black then. Her thumb moved along the faded edge. It was blue. Ethan said nothing. My mother told me not to let them see my face. She said if they recognized the child who survived, they would come back. Nayeli looked toward the land office. So I learned to stay unseen. Mercer finally spoke. This is madness. Nobody answered him. Reed looked at Ethan. Samuel Cole found them near the wash before dawn. My father. He hid the girl. Treated the wound. Then he came to me. Ethan's chest tightened. What did he see? Reed stared at Mercer. Enough. Mercer's hand moved toward his coat. Not a gun. Papers. Power. Habit. Nayeli saw it and almost smiled. Samuel kept records, she said. Ethan looked at her. You came looking for him. Yes. He's been dead 6 years. I know now. Her voice softened. For the first time, grief entered it openly. I crossed 3 territories. To find a dead man. Ethan took a step closer. You should have told me. Nayeli looked at him. The market disappeared from her eyes. Only he remained. Would you have believed me before the veil fell? Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. He remembered the moment Pike named her father. The doubt. How quickly it came. Nayeli saw the answer before he gave it. She looked away. That silence hurt worse than accusation. Mercer laughed again, but no one joined him. You have no proof. Nayeli turned. Mercer pointed at the pendant. Stories. Scars. An old sheriff's failing memory. That proves nothing. Slowly, Nayeli reached beneath her shawl. She removed the turquoise pendant, held it between 2 fingers. Mercer's eyes sharpened. For the first time, Ethan saw fear return to his face. Nayeli stepped forward. You are right. Then she opened the pendant. And Mercer smiled. Because inside, there was nothing. Mercer's smile came back slowly. Not because he had won. Because he thought everyone else had lost. Nayeli stood in the middle of the market with the turquoise pendant open in her palm. Empty. No paper. No seal. No proof. Only a hollow silver chamber catching the afternoon light. A murmur moved through the crowd. Small at first. Then louder. Horace Pike shook his head. Knew it. Mercer straightened his vest. There. He pointed at the pendant. A frightened woman. An old story. Nothing more. Sheriff Reed looked sick. Ethan said nothing. He was watching Nayeli. She did not look surprised. That was what bothered him. Mercer noticed too. His smile faded slightly. You thought something was in there. Nayeli closed the pendant. No, the answer landed softly. Mercer frowned. Ethan turned toward her. Then understood. The pendant had never been the evidence. It had been bait. Nayeli looked at him. Not at Mercer. At him. And something in her expression reached backward through 20 years. Samuel Cole. The cedar box. The tintype. The old saddle hanging untouched in Ethan's barn. His father had kept it long after the leather cracked. Refused to sell it. Refused to throw it away. Ethan felt the memory rise all at once. A seam. Double-stitched. Wrong for a saddle strap. His father had repaired everything cleanly. Except that one place. Ethan turned. Mercer saw it. Where are you going? Ethan was already walking. Then running. He reached his horse, swung into the saddle, and drove hard toward the ranch. Behind him, voices erupted. He heard Nayeli shout something. He did not stop. The ride felt longer than 3 miles. Dust burned his eyes. Hooves struck dry earth like hammer blows. By the time he reached the barn, his horse was foaming at the bit. Ethan dropped from the saddle and went straight to the old tack wall. There. Samuel Cole's saddle. Brown leather. Silver buckle. 20 years of dust. Ethan pulled the side strap loose. The stitching near the buckle was darker than the rest. He cut it open with his knife. Something crackled inside. Paper. Oil-wrapped. Folded narrow. His hands shook as he opened it. Names. Dates. Survey numbers. Payment records. And one signature at the bottom. Silas Mercer. Ethan stared at it. Then at a second line. Deputy Witness, Amos Reed. His father had hidden half the truth in plain sight. Ethan rode back faster. When he reached the market, the crowd had grown. Mercer was speaking loudly now. Confident again. She came here to accuse decent men with nothing but... Ethan threw the folded paper onto the table. Mercer stopped. Nobody moved. Sheriff Reed stepped forward. He opened it. His face changed. That's my signature. Mercer's voice hardened. Forgery. Reed looked up. No, Nayeli reached down. She picked up the torn black veil. Then, with 2 fingers, she found the hem. Ethan saw the tiny stitches. She tore them open. A second strip of paper slid into her hand. The market went silent again. Nayeli placed it beside Samuel's half. The edges matched. Perfectly. One document. Split 20 years ago. One half hidden by a cowboy. The other carried by a frightened child beneath the very cloth everyone had mocked. Mercer stared at the joined pages. His face emptied. Nayeli smoothed the veil beside them. My mother told me never to let them take this. Ethan looked at the black cloth. At the scar. At Mercer. The thing Red Hollow believed had hidden shame had been carrying the truth all along. Sheriff. Reed lifted the completed document. Then he read the first line aloud. And before he reached Mercer's name, 3 men in the crowd quietly stepped away from him. Justice did not arrive with a gunshot. It arrived with a piece of paper laid flat on a market table. Sheriff Amos Reed read slowly. Not because the words were difficult, because every line made another man in Red Hollow look away. Survey transfer, unauthorized seizure, payment received. His voice carried across the square. Silas Mercer stood 10 feet away. No one stood beside him now. That was new. Caleb Dorsey had moved toward the edge of the crowd. Horace Pike stared at the ground. 2 ranchers who had laughed at Nayeli that morning were reading the faces around them, trying to decide which side history had chosen. Reed reached the signature. He stopped. Mercer spoke first. That document is 20 years old. Ethan leaned against the table. Paper doesn't forget. Mercer's eyes hardened. You think this changes anything? No one answered. So Reed kept reading. Names of families. Parcel numbers. Money paid before the fires. Money paid after. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Land declared abandoned. Claims transferred. Witnesses disappeared. A story about Apache raiders repeated until nobody asked who benefited from it. Nayeli stood beside the torn veil. She said nothing. She did not need to. For 20 years, other men had spoken for her family. Now the records were doing it. A rancher named Thomas Bell pushed through the crowd. He was nearly 60 and owned grazing land south of town. My East Field came through Mercer's office. Mercer looked at him. Thomas. Bell ignored him. He pointed at the document. That parcel number. Read it again. Reed did. Bell's face changed. My father bought that land from you. Mercer's jaw tightened. Another man stepped forward. Then another. 1 claim. 3. 7. The market shifted around Mercer like water pulling away from a stone. He raised his voice. You all profited from this town. Silence. You think your ranches built themselves? A woman near the feed store answered. My husband paid you for ours. Mercer turned toward her. She did not look. Away. That was when his power began to die. Not when Reed folded the evidence. Not when Ethan stood beside Nayeli. Not even when the truth of the massacre reached the crowd. It died when ordinary people stopped being afraid to disappoint him. Thomas Bell walked toward Mercer's land office. Above the door hung a polished wooden sign. Mercer Land Company. Bell reached up, pulled one nail free, then the other. The sign dropped into his hands. Nobody cheered. That made the moment heavier. He laid it face down in the dirt. Caleb Dorsey removed his hat, then stepped away from Mercer completely. Mercer looked around. Reed. The sheriff met his eyes. You'll answer for the records. Mercer gave a bitter laugh. To whom? Reed looked toward the courthouse. To people who can read. A few men almost smiled. Almost. No one touched a weapon. No warriors filled the ridge. No blood stained the market boards. Mercer simply stood beneath the same sun as everyone else while the town stopped pretending not to see him. Ethan looked at Nayeli. The black veil lay between them on the table, its torn hem open now, empty of secrets. You all right? He asked. Nayeli looked across the market. At Pike. At Bell. At the woman by the feed store. At Sheriff Reed. At Mercer standing alone. Then she looked at Ethan. No, a pause. But I will be. Behind them, another rancher crossed the street and pulled Mercer's second sign from the warehouse wall. Then another. By sundown, there were no signs left. And for the first time in 20 years, Red Hollow knew exactly whose shame had been hiding in plain sight. By morning, the wind had changed. It came down from the northern ridge cold and clean, carrying the smell of dry grass and distant rain. Ethan woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, he forgot Red Hollow, forgot Mercer, forgot the market. Then he saw the empty chair beside the stove. Nayeli's blanket was folded. Her cup was gone. The room felt wrong. Too still. Ethan stood in the doorway and looked toward the yard. No movement near the well. No shadow crossing the barn. He felt something tighten in his chest. Maybe she had left before dawn. Maybe she had always planned to. He stepped. Outside. That was when he saw the veil. Black cloth tied to the top rail of the fence. It moved softly in the wind. Not hidden. Not folded. Not carried close to the body. Left behind. For a moment, Ethan simply stared at it. He thought of the market. The laughter. The suspicion. The way men had decided what lived beneath that cloth before any of them knew her name. He thought of Samuel Cole. A little girl bleeding beneath a blue veil. A secret sewn into its edge. 20 years of silence. Then a sound came from the barn. Brush against horsehair. Ethan turned. Nayeli stood beside the bay mare, running a curry comb slowly along its shoulder. No veil. Morning light touched her face without permission and without resistance. The scar at her temple was visible. So was everything else. Ethan leaned against the barn door. Thought you were leaving. Nayeli kept brushing. I was. He waited. The mare shifted beneath her hand. Outside, the veil snapped once in the wind. Changed your mind? Ethan asked. Nayeli stopped. For a long moment, she looked at the animal instead of him. Then she said, I spent most of my life leaving before anyone could decide what I was. Ethan said nothing. She turned. Her eyes were calmer now, not softer, just free of the constant calculation he had seen since the market. My mother told me to stay unseen. She kept you alive. Yes. Nayeli looked toward the fence. And for a long time, I thought surviving was the same as living. The words settled between them. Ethan looked down at his boots. You don't owe this place anything. I know. You don't owe me either. I know that too. Something almost like amusement touched her mouth. That was new. Ethan nodded toward the ranch. Fence still needs work. Nayeli looked at the broken northern section. So does your roof. Roof leaks with dignity. Your dignity is getting the floor wet. Ethan smiled. Small. Unforced. The first real smile either of them had shared. Then Nayeli set the brush down. She walked past him into the open yard. No shawl drawn high. No hand reaching instinctively for cloth that was no longer there. Just the scar. The turquoise pendant. And the face Red Hollow had once been afraid to see. At the fence, she stopped beside the veil. Ethan expected her to untie it. She did not. Leaving that there, he asked. Nayeli looked at the black cloth moving against the morning sky. Yes. Why? She thought about it. Then answered. So I remember I had a choice. Ethan looked at her. Not as an Apache woman. Not as a witness. Not as a secret his father had protected. Just Nayeli. She turned toward the pasture. The sun had finally cleared the ridge. Golden light spread across the grass, touched the barn roof, the worn fence, the old saddle resting inside. Behind them, the veil kept moving in the wind. Once it had hidden a frightened child. Then it had carried the truth. Now it belonged to neither fear nor secrecy. It was only cloth. And beside it stood two people who had finally stopped asking the past for permission to remain.